I'd like to welcome everyone in the audience who is watching tonight. Good evening. Welcome to our first 2023 PA local event brought to you by Spotlight PA. Tonight we're talking about Harrisburg's old 8th Ward, the neighborhood the PA capital destroyed. We have two excellent sources here to help us do that, but first I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Colin Deppen, a newsletter editor for Spotlight PA, and this event is part of our PA Local series. PA Local is a weekly newsletter from Spotlight PA that covers Pennsylvania history, present-day curiosities, interesting characters, and much more. Our work at Spotlight PA is driven by a deep sense of public service, and it's powered by people like you, our readers and members. If you're already a member, a huge thank you from us. You are among a pioneering group of people who make Spotlight PA and our events like this one possible. And if you're not yet a member, please consider joining us now. We have a special offer from one of our supporters this evening, and that's all new monthly gifts to Spotlight PA will be matched at their annual value. That's 12 times your contribution. So again, that special offer means all new monthly gifts to Spotlight PA will be matched at their annual value at 12 times your initial contribution. That means if you give $15 per month right now, the Lenfest Institute for Journalism will kick in an additional $180. You can lock in your donation right now at spotlightpa.org/donate. That is, again, that's spotlightpa.org/donate. Quickly, a few housekeeping items. We're recording today's event to share with those who couldn't make it. Thank you to all who have sent questions in advance. If you have not asked a question, you can do so using the Q&A feature at the bottom of the toolbar there on your Zoom screen. We will get to as many questions as we can towards the end of our event. And with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists for this evening. Sharia Ben is a playwright and artistic director with Sankofa African American Theater Company in Harrisburg. And Lenwood Sloan is CEO of the Commonwealth Monument Project. For those who may be unfamiliar, Harrisburg's Old 8th Ward was a Black Jewish immigrant enclave comprising roughly 20 city blocks and thousands of residents. By the early 20th century, it was gone, razed to make way for the Capitol Park that soon took its place and which still stands there today. For my first question, I want to turn to Lenwood. And I want to ask Lenwood, can you give us a sense of what life was like in the old 8th Ward? And can you also describe for people watching who may not be familiar with the area, where exactly it was in relation to today's Capitol building?
Thank you very much for having me, and it is always an honor to be with my colleague and dear friend, Sharia Ben. If you have been to Harrisburg and you have been to the Capitol, then you were standing on the old 8th Ward. The 12 buildings of the Capitol complex from Walnut Street, which is at Strawberry Square, if you know the community, through Forster Street, and from 3rd Street, which runs in front of the Capitol stairs, all the shots that you see of people standing on the Capitol's 3rd Street, over to 7th Street, which is the State Street Bridge. This area was known as the 7th Ward. Of course, we call it the old 8th Ward now because the 7th Ward was divided into two parts to make a 6th Ward and an 8th Ward. And that 6th Ward was just across the line of Forester Street. So the entire Capitol complex takes up the footprint of the old 8th Ward. The old 8th Ward was the oldest, second oldest African-American community in Harrisburg. The first community fell roughly on the footprint of where the Amtrak and Pennsylvania Railroad Station is now. That area that falls around Mulberry Street was nicknamed Judytown after a prominent woman. When the city grew in 1840, it was moved, and from 1850 to the last vestiges of the 8th Ward is 1920. So we say from the Fugitive Slave Act to the 19th Amendment passage. Um, the Eighth Ward grew, became prosperous with 1,100 families and 500 businesses. It was also the site of the Underground Railroad. The National Park Service's network of freedom codifies that 4th and Walnut Street, the present 4th Street, which cuts across the lawn through the Irvis building, through the East Annex, through the North building and out onto Forster. It was called Tanner's Alley. It was Main Street in the 8th Ward at that time. And it was where the major businesses, several churches, the Masonic Hall was. 8th Ward was a safe house community on the Underground Railroad. And so people made it across Route 30 or up Route 11 and 15, 322 and 422, and into Harrisburg, and they harbored in the 8th Ward for the winter before they crossed Cameron Street and went up into what is now Allison Hill and began their climb to the mountains and towards New York and Canada.
And Len, the Capitol building itself would have been completed, I believe this was our third Capitol building in Pennsylvania. It would have been completed around 1906. Does that sound right to you?
Yes, the eighth ward was prominent and dominant after the fire of the Capitol. The Capitol moved to Grace United Methodist Church at State Street and 3rd Street, and it would have been on the edge of the Capitol. So if you're standing on the Capitol stairs looking south, looking north, looking east, you're standing on the footprint of the old Eighth.
So after the completion of our current Capitol building, a very opulent building for as anyone knows who's been there, at what point do they start looking at the neighborhoods around it and start saying, we would like to claim this property through eminent domain to expand these grounds?
Well, that happens almost from the beginning of the city's history. We look at, for example, the Bethel AME Church and its history in Harrisburg, because it parallels the old Eighth Ward and the history of neighborhoods. So the first Bethel Church was down there in Judytown in 1838, where the train station was, and they took that neighborhood for eminent domain to build the Pennsylvania Railroad, and they moved the neighborhood to Short Street, which is where our Forum building if you've ever been to a large concert in Harrisburg, the Forum is a Deco and Nouveau concert hall. The neighbors moved again to State Street. And when I say the churches were the centers of the neighborhoods, that where the fountain is now, and where the Soldiers Grove is, which was the large vicinity of the residential houses in the old Eighth Ward. Where the finance building is now was once William Howard Day's school. Where the North building is now was once the Wesley AME and Bethel AME Church. So the neighborhood kept being moved. One interesting thing about that old Eighth Ward, and Sharia will tell you more about this, at the time, is that after the 1850 Fugitive Slave Act, the Federal Fugitive Slave Office was at 3rd and Walnut, 1 block away from the old Eighth Ward. And the bounty hunters would come into the old Eighth Ward every morning and post wanted and bounty signs. So it was quite a remarkable achievement for the African American community and their Quaker, Irish, and German neighbors to actually hide freedom seekers 1 block away from Richard McAllister's bounty office. the neighborhood begins really to, well, let me go back very, very quickly and say there are four waves of African American, uh, four waves of African Americans in the history of Harrisburg. From 1790 to 1820, you have the first wave of African Americans who were mostly manumitted, meaning that they were given their freedom because of some remarkable achievement, the deed, and they had come into the Americas, into Pennsylvania and into central Pennsylvania, primarily as trained tradesmen, iron workers, carpenters, marble haulers, glaziers. The second wave comes after the Fugitive Slave Act, when people are trying to make it to Pennsylvania and be covered by the gradual abolition and the other movements of freedom. And these people took their own destiny in their hands. We do not refer to them as fugitives or runaways. We refer to them as freedom seekers. They amalgamated and assimilated into the community. Third wave are primary, and the first and second wave are educated people, by the way. Pennsylvania's Black community voted until 1838 when the Constitution was changed. I need to say that again, all of you all in Philadelphia. African Americans in Pennsylvania who owned land and paid taxes voted until 1838. So many of these first Black families in Harrisburg actually experienced losing the right to vote. And so their advocacy was to regain their civil rights. They were freedmen and freemen, meaning they were at least two generations free. They had a lot to lose in the 1838 change of the Constitution. The third wave are folks who are coming from the rural freedmen, freed through emancipation, and they're coming across the Mason-Dixon line by the Freedmen's Bureau, and obviously central Pennsylvania is a closest passageway from Virginia, Maryland, Kentucky, Missouri. The fourth wave are those that are coming just before the old Eighth Ward ends with the Great Migration. And they are refugees. The first and second group are immigrants. They're migrating to Pennsylvania. The third and the fourth group are fleeing Jim Crow and fleeing the South. So they have different skill. They bring different skill bases, different intelligences. So it's not a monolithic community challenge.
Thank you for that, Linwood. I want to turn to Sharia, if I may, and talk about your series, a play, The Voices of the Eighth Chronicles 2 Stories from Harrisburg's Old Eighth Ward. Sharia, I wanted to know what sort of drew you to the story, why you decided to write and focus on this story.
Yes, thank you. And I am honored to be here with Spotlight PA, and especially honored to share this space with Linwood. And that question, the answer is really wrapped up in meeting Linwood and being part of Pennsylvania Past Players. I moved here from Baltimore about 25 years ago, and I really was anxious to leave because I just felt that this community and the space wasn't very vibrant and welcoming for me as African American and also a theater lover. I came for a job, and in Baltimore, when I would get off work, I could go to the theater and be on stage and had opportunities and access to stories, and felt uh, represented on stage, and didn't really have that here until I met Linwood. I showed up for what I thought was an audition for a show, and it turned out to be something that was life-changing. It was an introduction to living history. Fast forward to about 5 years ago, I was asked to be a part of the Martin Luther King Jr. Commemoration celebration by Gamut Theater. And as a result of being a part of that, they were asked to do something for Dauphin County. The commissioners wanted a Black History Month program. So through that conversation, I said, well, I have learned so much about this history in the Eighth Ward through the past players. Why not spread that out in a theater format to the schools, to the general public? So, because I fell in love with the Eighth Ward, with the um, the very um, premise that there was this diverse community of people that were uh, white, Black, as Linwood said, freed and free, the safe haven, vibrant community that grew. So, and I thought that everyone in Harrisburg or this area knew these stories except me. But as would continue to tell these stories or discuss them, people were like, I didn't know that. So that was the genesis for, okay, why do we tell these stories, and how important, and that this storytelling would be funded and supported by a municipality, by the county government, by, like, yes, this is part of the, if I may say, the reckoning of disconnecting and dismantling communities then, and what is continuing to be this cycle of ruining lives and legacies. So I started this journey out of there was a gap, there's a need to fill, and there are these stories that need to be told. And also the work of the Monument Project and the 100 Voices and Digital Harrisburg. I had the foundation of research that was done by um, the committee and the partnerships from Messiah and history detectives and historians that all came together to find these stories. I wanted to give these people, individuals, I wanted not to give them voice because they had voice, but to give them a forum, a platform to be heard. And then also to engage the community. The theater community is, and I'm being very generous when I say at 95% white or non-people of color. So I also saw this as an opportunity to engage with people that would otherwise not have access to these stories and in this narrative. Writing this, I was able to present these stories in a beautiful sense, in a sense that honored the community. And when I was first introduced to the Eighth Ward, or another introduction to the Eighth Ward, it was introduced to me as the Bloody Eighth, that this was a community that was unsanitary. It was vile. It was violent. It was worthless, which was part of how this community and lawmakers and the public could take over this community, to condemn it and campaign that they were doing it to make something more beautiful. So on stage and through these stories, I get to say, no, that's not accurate, um, factual history.
I, if I could step in one minute to echo what my colleague and friend has said. So America is absolutely fascinated with the image of the freedom seeker who literature has called for 150 years, the runaway, the enslaved, the barefoot person. There's very, very little literature, especially above the Mason-Dixon line, before 1960 about the notion of freemen and freedmen. There's a great body of research about emancipation, but there's very little information before 1980 about civil rights. So we wanted to talk about the fact that the Eighth Ward was primarily a free and freed community, not an enslaved community. They had had a long history of freedom and seeking their rightful place for equity, parity, and justice. As I said, African Americans in Pennsylvania voted until 1838. The African Americans in the history of the old Eighth Ward continued rigorously and every day to challenge that vote being taken away until the 1870 15th Amendment. In fact, Thomas Morris Chester, the first African American to write for a major newspaper. He wrote for the Philadelphia newspaper, the Tribune. He was also a war correspondent for the Army of the Potomac. He called a meeting in 1863, on January 15th of 1863, at the Bethel AME Church in the old Eighth Ward. He called African Americans from across Pennsylvania to write a response to Abraham Lincoln about the Emancipation Proclamation, with a criticism that nowhere in the Emancipation Proclamation did it even acknowledge the existence of free men and free women of color. And they wanted Abraham Lincoln to write in to the Emancipation Proclamation the clause acknowledging the existence of free men and women and their civil rights, their rights to serve on juries, their rights for public education, which Thaddeus Stevens, the architect of the 13th and 14th Amendment, had passed public education in 1832. So it was it was a crash. It was an implosion. It was a retreat from the support of civil rights. They sent 70 men to Washington, D.C. to speak to Lincoln. Lincoln offered them a couple of things. He offered them $500,000 to buy ships. If I free African Americans, can you help me send them back to Africa? And they were like, no, we live here. This is our home. We came here to talk to you about our right to vote, our right to education. The compromise of Lincoln was that African American men would be conscripted into the Civil War, and that gave us the opportunity for our United States colored troops. But those United States colored troops were not invited to Washington, D.C. in May of 1865 for the last Grand March. And so the women of the old Eighth Ward, under the banner of the Henry Highland Garnett Society, organized a grand march of the United States colored troops, and African American patriots of the Civil War from 25 states came to Harrisburg and marched through the old Eighth Ward to Simon Cameron's house, where they were finally acknowledged for their service. We reenacted that grand march in 2010 and again in 2015 to give those states and those patriots, and especially their descendants, some sense of pride. There was no plaque, no statue, no marker. And so we began by developing a plan for an African American monument on the Capitol lawns. And we knew that we wanted to pay tribute to the 1,100 families. We couldn't really acknowledge or do justice to 1,100 families. So a committee selected 100 voices, we call them, that we would speak. And those 100 voices, men who were doctors and lawyers and architects and engineers and funeral directors and barbershop owners, would be presented to try to resist this notion of the bloody eighth, of alcohol and gambling. And we exalted those 100 voices by producing a book about their history and their names on the monument. And then after the monument was finished, Sharia took that work into the body of literature. And what we had done is research and monument building. We were doing our monument at the time that Confederate monuments were coming down, by the way. So it was very, very controversial time for us. We chose the South Lawn, which is the K. Leroy Irvis lawn, to create the Irvis Equality Circle, a place where we could place our monument that talked about equality and justice. Why? Because Irvis was the first African-American Speaker of the House from any state in the Union since Reconstruction. And so we thought that also was an act of reparation.
And while the Monument Committee and the work of the 100 Voices, the research of those 1,000 families was happening and starting, the seeds of Sankofa African American Theater Company were taking root. So we started and officially incorporated in 2017 with for me, the mission was to engage, to educate, to enrich this capital region around African American history, culture, and experience. And this is for the community as much as it is for the artist who did not have opportunities outside of generally February to work and present and really operate and love in the theater and arts. So I look at what the work that Linwood was and the Monument Committee was doing, and the budding of Sankofa as a theater company, really kind of paralleling and then coming into existence to really support and give strength to each other's work. And this is a picture of the type of unity and community that was reflected in the 8th Ward.
There's two quick things I wanted to put in. The work has come full circle, actually, which is so exciting about sharing this time with Sharia, because I was a resident artist at the Baltimore Theater Project many years ago. And I did a project called Baltimore Voices. If you know Baltimore's West Preston Street area, that neighborhood had been torn down during redevelopment, and that Black community had been completely destroyed. And so we did a piece called Baltimore Voices, and where we asked people to write letters to the theater project to tell us the oldest story their family remembers about that neighborhood. And then the historians collected that information and presented that information to a theater company that created a work about it. So essentially, Sharia and Sankofa have done that. They've taken the research that we have done with our colleagues at Messiah University and the physical manifestation of the monument, the renaming of the chest of that stretch of street where Chester lived as Chester Way, and the rededication of the new library to be a welcome center and a research center on African Americans and the power of the vote. And we have encapsulated and created what is really a cultural and heritage tourism district that stretches from the Capitol to the river and place markers, the monument, and Sharia has taken that work forward by putting it into a body of literature. A play as a responsible document of record, as well as a creative expression of its people. So we can't bring back the houses, we can't reconstruct the main street, but we can bring back the memories. And most importantly, we can bring back the descendants of the people who have lived there to come and have civic engagement and civic dialogue with us, to come stand with us on the recapture, reclaim their destiny, and they're a part of the story. So we've been able to find 73 of our 100 family members of 73 of our 100 voices that we're honoring, stretching all the way from Timor's Chester's family in Senegal and London to families in the Deep South, families in Canada. And we invite them back to experience the monument. Sharia invites them into the theater to have dialogue. And so it's a re-education of the legacy.
The education component is critical in what we do for each of these, and this is the fifth installment of presenting these stories, and I'm committed to telling all 100 that we have in those 100 voices some way, somehow, and this is the theater and civic engagement, bringing these people together that would otherwise not come together around and hear this history and hear the voices from our perspective, and again from the facts and the history. It's a way of connecting the disconnecting and reorganizing, re-energizing our community. So we have over these past 5 productions and iterations of Voices of the Eighth, over upwards of 5,000 people, students engaging with this history, and then being able to sit around and talk. And I think you may have photos of this, but that diversity of dialogue and is strengthening our community and moving us forward. And then to hear these stories of Esther Popel and Jacob Compton, and these are people who came through and lived and influenced the 8th Ward, but also state and national and international history. So it's not just contained in the 8th Ward. The influence is not just contained in the 8th Ward. It goes out. And this is a way for me artistically to celebrate the best parts of our history, connect them with our very relevant and the present. So the things that these people encountered, their stories are not new. And there's nothing like having a student who is in the audience who went to Foos yell out, "Holy, I didn't know Foos was Black." And people who lived in the William Howard Day housing community and have families buried in the cemetery, William Howard Day Cemetery, say, "I didn't know he was Black. I lived
It's,
through that. I was educated through that. And these names mean something more to me now because now I'm connected to people who look like me, who um, who took charge of their own destiny. I didn't know, again, all of these I didn't know. And then there are grown folks who are saying, "I didn't know." And they walk out, and the call to action is, now that you know,
what are you going to do?
what are you going to do with it?
Yeah.
Sharia, can I show, I wanted to show a clip from the play from Voices of the,
But just before you do that, could I go back to the previous slide just before you do that? Because Sharia reminded that this is Esther Popo, who was the first woman to graduate from Dickinson College, who could not stay on the dormitory because she was Black, but who they had to ask, was she Black? Because she was so light in the census, she was designated an octoroon. So Esther Popo could have passed for white. And some people said maybe she should have. She chose to identify with her Blackness and to be a monument. This is Jacob Compton, who in 1861, when Abraham Lincoln came to Harrisburg on his way to his first inauguration, there was an attempt on his life. And Jacob Compton, because he had been an agent on the Underground Railroad, knew the routes out of Harrisburg and in to Middletown and helped Abraham Lincoln escape assassination the first time and on to his destiny. And we say, what if Jacob Compton didn't come to work that day? What if Jacob Compton said no? Thomas Morris Chester, who started his life as a freeman at Avery College, which is now Duquesne University, and excelled to become the national the Grand Marshal of the Louisiana National Guard. And so the achievements of these people are remarkable. And finally, I'd like to say, everybody says to us, "Are you sure these people are Black?" They're dressed too nice. They're dressed too well to be Black. And that's another myth that we want to kind of destroy, is that ragtag supplicant waiting to be saved. These people took their own destiny. And
Sharia, I wanted to ask if you could provide us, before we show the clip, a brief synopsis of the play. What do audience members encounter?
So what you experience through this production is it's a journey, and it starts in Africa, and it starts with the affirmation that Africans who were captured and transported as cargo to America came from this lineage of greatness, and they were intelligent beings, inventors, and many of the things that were done on as they were enslaved on plantations, they brought those skills to America and perfected things. So we start the journey there. It is storytelling using griots, African storytellers, and also the Sankofa bird, this mythical creature or bird that symbolically has its neck pointed to the backwards, looking backwards, and its feet planted firmly in the present, and its wings propelling it forward. That's the past, the present, and the future all coming together. Moves us forward with power and purpose. And from there, you encounter people, voices of the eighth, so historical figures like William Howard Day, Agnes Kemp. You also Maud Coleman. These are warriors, and you also hear from primary sources their words, their letters. You will hear even from poets that are very contemporary, like Marion Cannon Dornell, who lived in Harrisburg and wrote about history. Her work is incorporated into this, and Alice Dunbar Nelson. So those are poets. So you get this individual strands of history and voices are woven together to create this beautiful tapestry of art, which is also the theme for what you will see in the backdrop or the scenic design of the play.
Okay, let's take a look.
2 years after Maud Coleman's letter to the governor, the quest for true freedom and equality is still ongoing. This road is still being paved. There is still work to do to move us forward. As expressed in Amanda Gorman's poem, "Ill We Cry." We ask ourselves, where can we find light to this never-ending shade? The loss we carry us must reign. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace, and the norms and notions of what just isn't always justice.
The dawn is not ours, for we knew it. Somehow we do it. Somehow we weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. We strive to form a nation with purpose and to compose a community committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man.
And so we lift our gaze not to what stands between us, but to what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first, we must first put our differences aside. We break down our walls so that we can reach one another. The history if only because we heritage is more. Not to march back to what was, but move to
A country that is bruised but full, benevolent but bold, fierce and free of the shade of blame and unafraid. As the new dawn rises, as we hit,
There's always light. If only we're brave enough to see it. If only we're brave enough to see it.
Some stills from the play. In the interest of time, I know you have to depart soon. I want to just show here in one of our slides upcoming. This is the monument that Linwood had.
Yes. This monument is created on the K. Leroy Irvis Circle by John Melham and Associates, the Circle. It's got a 2,500-pound granite block buried underneath it to support the monument. It's 4 great orators, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, William Howard Day, Jacob T. Compton, and Thomas Morris Chester. They're standing around an orator's podium, and that podium has the names of the 100 people who lived and represent that community. Frances Harper is handing William Howard Day the 15th Amendment back, Colin. You know, she is saying, gentlemen, I don't see women in this document anywhere. You know, this is 1870. It's great that we achieved this, the right to vote for men, but we need to continue to work. It would be another 50 years till 1920 that before that happened, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper would actually pass away before she saw the achievement that she had helped to begin way back at Seneca when she was with Lucretia Mott. And so the monument is a neutral ground. It's a common place for people to begin to come and speak and rest and have dialogue. It was created by Becky Ault. This is Jacob T. Compton on the left-hand side of the screen. He was the only one, Colin, that we didn't have an image of his face for this sculpture. But Becky's very clever. So we found 7 of his descendants, and she used court reporter style to draw a composite of the faces of his 7 descendants and to create and to bring Jacob Compton's face back. Jacob Compton was one of the 5 Grand Marshals of the Prince Hall African American Masonic Lodge that came out of the old 8th Ward. 5 of the Grand Masters of Pennsylvania in the 19th century came out of the old 8th Ward. So it's steeped in pride and tradition. We were honored by the Toni Morrison Foundation. Toni Morrison has a bench by the roadside, and she, the foundation awards monuments and historically relevant sites, these benches where people can sit and rest and contemplate. And so it creates simultaneously a monument, a destination, and a starting point where we hope you end up in our collection at the Thomas Chester Welcome Center, where you can immerse yourself more in the struggle for to maintain the right to vote. And we are in that struggle right now. So this is not a sepia tone piece of history. This is a blueprint for the struggle, and that's what we.
I think a bit of a philosophical question, and I want to leave a little bit of time, if possible, to see if there are audience questions as well. But Pennsylvania has undertaken this pretty ambitious review of its historical marker program. There are many of them all over the state. They're looking for outdated references, historical inaccuracies, contextual issues. There were some updates to markers in the Gettysburg area that referred to Confederate troops in fairly romantic terms. I wonder, given all of the thought that both of you have given to this subject, what do you think Pennsylvania, or if you're more comfortable speaking to Harrisburg specifically, gets right and gets wrong about itself when it talks about its own history? What do you think Pennsylvania gets wrong when it's discussing its own history, and what do you think it gets right?
Well, first of all, Harrisburg is simultaneously a city, a county seat, and a capital. So Harrisburg belongs to the entire Commonwealth. Pennsylvania was the 4th state in the Union to ratify the 15th Amendment, and the 7th state in the Union to ratify the 19th Amendment. We like to say that, it sounds great, that we were the 7th, but 2/3 of the state of Pennsylvania voted against ratifying the 19th Amendment in 1920. And if you look at a map, it's practically all of central Pennsylvania. Lancaster, these communities we think of as progressive communities, they voted against women's right to vote. And the right to vote and the right to cast your vote is the primary currency of our morning news, our evening newspaper, redlining, redistricting, making it difficult for people to cast their vote. So some folks forget that James Buchanan was from Pennsylvania. Buchanan, the president before Lincoln, who could have stopped the Civil War right there on April 19th. Some of us forget that McAllister, the chief fugitive slave bounty hunter was from Pennsylvania, or that Samuel Randall, who casted the deciding vote to end Reconstruction, was from Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania is 5 minutes. Great, I'll be there. So Pennsylvania is a complex political ground, and the border of Pennsylvania, the Mason-Dixon line, which is only a geographical border. The philosophical border is Harrisburg, you know, and York and Gettysburg, and you know, have leaned and been sympathetic, and it's historically proven to.
It's complex, like you
it's
said.
very complex.
It's very
Very
complex. And what I found out through this process about the McAllisters, about Richard McAllister in the bounty office right there. And then this is the same family that owned, you know, that donated Fort Hunter. And I go there and I don't know that connection. And I think Pennsylvania can make better connections with these stories and not erase what is being looked at now as inaccuracies, but actually you show the edits, show the notes that this is what was said
Yes.
when this monument or marker was done, and don't take it down, correct them. I want to see the edits. And
you
yes,
mentioned you mentioned the PHMC edits, for example.
Mm-hmm.
On 2nd and Mulberry Street, there is a PHMC sign there. It talks about Lincoln escaping. It doesn't mention Jacob Compton at all. His name is absent, you know. So
put it there and say in 2023 we added Jacob Compton, and you see how long that's connecting the dots, how long this Black man, this person, was left out of the narrative. But if you revise the entire thing, if you take them down and you don't include the narrative, then it's erasure all over again.
I'm going to have to step away because I am at the Irish and American Museum in Albany, New York right now, about to give a major presentation called Black and White and Green in America. Very few Americans realize that 38% of African Americans have at least one Irish ancestor. And I'm not very good in math, but if 38% of Black people have at least one Irish ancestor, then X% of Irish have at least one Black ancestor. And on Louis Gates' show last week, there was several prominent African American who were shocked to discover their mixed race, and one who talked about this couldn't be plantation rape because my grandfather was an Irishman. He was poor Irishman. This was called amalgamation before it was called miscegenation. And what we don't get right is that we're all of it. And it's time to claim it all. Claim it and name it. Thank you. I leave you in the good hands of Sharia Ban.
Thank you both for this discussion. We are up against time, so I want to thank everyone for being here, joining us tonight. I think we'd all agree it was a great conversation. I want to thank Sharia Lenwood, obviously, and just to state again that, you know, everything we do at Spotlight PA we do is a free public service. And so in this time, I'd like to remind any of you who have not yet made a contribution, and if you're able to do so, please consider doing so by going to spotlightpa.org/donate now. The contributions, again, of any amount help us keep this programming free for all, and your support goes directly back into the journalism that we do. Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend ahead, and we hope to see you again soon.